A poor black mechanic gripped the steering wheel, hurrying home through the freezing night, but his journey was interrupted by a stalled Cadillac on the side of the road. Stepping out, he walked closer and saw an old man trapped inside. The car's battery had died. Remembering his father's words, the young man braved the biting cold, opened his trunk and got to work. What he didn't know was that the man inside was watching his every move, and what happened next would change his life forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. The snow fell heavy that night, thick and silent, blanketing Route 7 in a white so pure it hurt to look at. Eli Turner's headlights cut through the darkness like tired hands reaching for something they'd never quite touch. The heater in his '98 Honda rattled, more noise than warmth, but he'd learned to live with it, learned to live with a lot of things. He was 28, but his hands looked older. Coal-used, stained with engine grease that never quite washed out, no matter how hard he scrubbed. He'd just finished a double shift at Murphy's Gas and Service, 16 hours of pumping gas, checking oil, smiling at customers who rarely smiled back. 16 hours at minimum wage plus tips that barely covered the gas to get there. His back ached, his eyes burned, but at least it was work. Work was all he had, really. Work and his mother. They lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, the kind of building where the heat worked 3 days out of 7 and the landlord's promises were worth less than the paper they weren't written on. Eli slept on the couch, had been sleeping there since he was 19, since his father died and left them with nothing but medical debt and a mortgage they couldn't keep. They'd lost the house within a year. His mother, Ruth, never complained. She worked mornings at the laundromat, folding other people's clothes for $8 an hour, and spent her evenings at the church helping with the food bank. She had a heart condition, arrhythmia, the free clinic doctor had called it, but the medication was expensive and insurance was a luxury they couldn't afford. So she rationed her pills, took them every other day instead of daily, and told Eli not to worry when he caught her pressing a hand to her chest and breathing slow. "I'm fine, baby," she'd say. "Don't you fuss." But Eli did worry. Worried every time he left for work. Worried every time his phone rang. Worried that one day he'd come home and find her on the floor, and this time there'd be no getting up. That's why he worked doubles, triples when he could get them. Every extra dollar went into the coffee can under the kitchen sink, the one labeled "rainy day" in his mother's careful handwriting. Last he counted, there was $347 in there. It wasn't enough for anything that mattered, but it was something. A start. Tonight, driving home through the snow, Eli let himself imagine for just a moment what it would be like to not count every penny. To buy his mother the medication she needed without choosing between that and the electric bill. To fix the rattling heater in his car. To sleep in a bed instead of a couch that smelled like 15 years of other people's lives. But he'd learned a long time ago that dreaming didn't pay bills. The roads were empty, and there was something peaceful about driving through snow when the world had gone quiet. Just him and the white and the knowledge that he'd survived another day. The Willow Street Bridge appeared ahead, its iron beams dark against the white. Eli had crossed it 1,000 times. More, it was the only way home. That's when he saw it. A car, black Cadillac, parked crooked on the shoulder just past the bridge. Hazard lights blinking slow, like a heartbeat trying not to give up. Eli's first instinct was to keep driving. It was late, cold, he was tired, and people with Cadillacs usually had people to call. People with money had options. People like him just had cold and hunger and the hope that tomorrow might hurt a little less. But his foot found the brake anyway. His mother's voice echoed in his head, something she'd said 1,000 times, something her mother had said to her. "We help because we can, not because we should. That's what makes us human." Eli pulled over 20 feet behind, leaving his engine running, couldn't risk his own battery dying, and stepped out into the cold. The wind hit him immediately, sharp, biting, the kind that found every gap in his jacket, and reminded you winter didn't care who you were or how much money you didn't have. He walked toward the Cadillac, boots crunching in the snow, hands shoved deep in his pockets because he'd left his gloves at work 3 days ago. Through the driver's window, he saw a man, late 50s, maybe 60. Silver hair, expensive coat, the kind Eli had only seen in store windows, and a face locked somewhere between irritation and disbelief. The man was staring at his phone, tapping the screen repeatedly. Even from outside, Eli could see the black screen. Dead. Eli knocked, soft, 2 knuckles. The man's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing. For a second, they just looked at each other. 2 strangers separated by glass and cold and a lifetime of different choices. Eli saw the way the man's gaze traveled down his oil-stained jacket, his worn boots, his dark skin dusted with snow. Saw the suspicion settle in. He'd seen that look before. The window stayed up. Eli waited, gestured toward the hood, mouthed, "Need help." The man, Charles Whitaker, though Eli didn't know that yet, stared at him, then looked away. Back at his dead phone, his jaw tightened. Eli knocked again, gentler this time. The window rolled down, just 2 inches. "I'm fine," Charles said. Clipped. Final. "Your battery dead." Charles didn't answer. Just kept staring straight ahead, one hand gripping the steering wheel like it might somehow start the car through sheer will. "Phone too?" Eli asked. A muscle worked in Charles's jaw. "The tow company will send someone eventually." Eventually might be a while. Eli glanced at the empty road. "Haven't seen another car in 20 minutes. I said I'm fine, but he wasn't. Eli could see the fog of his breath inside the car, could see the way the man's shoulders were already starting to hunch against the cold. The engine was off. The heat was gone. In weather like this, sitting still was dangerous. "Listen," Eli said quietly. "I've got jumper cables. Takes 5 minutes. Then you can be on your way." "I don't need," "I know." Eli cut him off, not unkindly. "You don't need help from a stranger. Don't need help from someone who looks like me. I get it." He paused. "But it's 19 degrees out here, and it's only getting colder. You sit here till morning, they're gonna find you frozen." Charles's eyes flicked toward him. Sharp. Angry. But underneath, just for a second, Eli saw something else. Fear maybe, or just the exhaustion of pride. "I can call someone," Charles said. But his voice was quieter now. "With what?" Eli nodded toward the dead phone. Silence. The wind howled across the bridge, shaking both cars. Snow swirled in eddies across the road. Charles sat there, staring at nothing, his breath coming out in short white puffs. Every instinct in him screamed not to trust this stranger. Not to accept help from someone he didn't know, didn't hire, didn't control. But the cold was already seeping through his coat and his fingers were starting to go numb. "Fine," he finally muttered. Not looking at Eli. Not rolling the window down any further. Eli didn't wait for him to change his mind. He walked back to his Honda, pulled the cables from the trunk. The same cables his father had used, one of the only things that hadn't been sold or repossessed, and brought them over. Charles had popped the hood, but he stayed in the car, arms crossed, watching through the windshield. Eli worked in silence, clipping red to positive, black to negative, moving with the kind of efficiency that came from doing something 100 times before. His fingers were already numb, but he didn't hurry. Didn't do a sloppy job just to get out of the cold. Do it right, or don't do it at all. His father had taught him that. "Try it now," Eli called out. Charles turned the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. The headlights blazed bright, and warmth began flooding through the vents. Charles sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. Not at Eli. Not at anything. Eli unhooked the cables, wound them up carefully, and walked to the window. "You're good to go," he said. "Let it run a few minutes before you drive." Charles reached for his wallet, pulled out 320s without looking. $60, more than Eli made in a day. "Here." Eli shook his head. "I'm good. Take it." Charles' voice had an edge now. Command, not request. Like everything in his world could be solved with money. "Really, I'm fine." Eli smiled, small, tired, genuine. "Just glad I could help." Charles's eyes went cold. He'd seen this before, people who refused money because they wanted something else, something more, or because they wanted to make him feel small for offering. Like charity was an insult. Like this kid was somehow better than him for refusing. "Suit yourself," Charles said flatly. He rolled up the window, didn't say thank you, didn't look back. The Cadillac pulled away, red taillights disappearing into the snow. Eli stood there a moment, watching the empty road, flexing his frozen fingers. $60 would have helped. Would have bought his mother's medication for a week. Would have paid the late fee on the electric bill. But he'd learned a long time ago that some things you couldn't put a price on. His dignity was one of them. He walked back to his car, got in, turned the key. The engine rattled to life. He sat there a moment, waiting for feeling to return to his hands, thinking about the man in the Cadillac. Wondering what it was like to be so rich that a dead battery was just an inconvenience. Wondering if the man had anyone waiting for him at home. Wondering if he'd ever said thank you to anyone in his life. Then he put the car in gear, eased back onto Route 7, and drove home through the silent, falling snow. The apartment would be cold. His mother would be asleep on the couch. She always gave him the bedroom when he worked late, no matter how many times he told her not to. There'd be leftovers in the fridge if he was lucky, peanut butter and bread if he wasn't. But it was home, and tomorrow he'd get up and do it all again. Behind him, the Willow Street Bridge stood dark and patient, waiting. Ruth Turner's heart gave out on a Tuesday. Not completely. Not all at once. Just enough to scare her, enough to send her collapsing in the kitchen with one hand pressed to her chest and the other reaching for the counter she didn't quite catch. Eli found her there 20 minutes later, still conscious but pale, her lips the color of old ash. He didn't remember the drive to St. Joseph Hospital. Didn't remember what he said to the paramedics, or how he signed the forms with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He only remembered his mother's voice, quiet and steady even as they wheeled her away. "I'm all right, baby. I'm all right," but she wasn't. The doctors used words like ischemia and arrhythmia, words that sounded too clean for what they meant. They told him she was stable, that they were monitoring her, that he should go home and rest. Eli didn't go home. He stayed in the chair beside her bed, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the steady beep of machines that knew her heartbeat better than he did. She slept, or tried to. He held her hand, didn't let go even when his arm went numb. The nurses brought him coffee he didn't drink and blankets he barely used. They stopped asking him to leave after the first night. By the third, they knew his name. "You need to rest," one of them whispered on Thursday morning, an older woman with kind eyes and tired hands. "She's going to be okay." "I know," Eli said, but he didn't move. That same Thursday, 3 floors up, Charles Whitaker checked himself into St. Joseph Hospital with a blood pressure reading that made his personal physician physically pale. The stress, the man had said. The late nights, the years of carrying weight no human body was designed to hold. Charles had waved him off. "Just give me the pills." But the doctor insisted. Observation. Tests 24 hours, minimum. So Charles found himself in a sterile room with white walls and machinery that beeped at irregular intervals, feeling more trapped than he had in years. He hated hospitals, hated the smell, antiseptic trying to cover decay. Hated the vulnerability of lying in a bed, while strangers checked his vitals and spoke to him in soft, patronizing tones. By Friday afternoon, his tests were complete. Normal enough. The doctor gave him prescriptions and warnings about stress, diet, exercise, the usual lecture Charles had heard before and would ignore again. He was gathering his things when he decided to walk the halls one last time, stretch his legs before the drive home. Clear his head. The second-floor corridor was quieter than his had been. Afternoon. Light slanted through windows at the far end. Most doors were closed, the rooms dim and still. Then he saw the young man, sitting in a chair outside one of the rooms, slouched forward, elbows on his knees, head bowed like he was praying or sleeping or both. There was something familiar about him. The dark skin, the worn jacket draped over the chair's arm, the way exhaustion sat on him like a weight. Charles slowed, then stopped. It was him. The one from the bridge, the one who'd stopped in the snow with his jumper cables and his quiet insistence. The one Charles hadn't thanked. The young man looked up as if sensing someone watching. His eyes were red-rimmed, tired, but recognition flickered across his face. "Oh," he said. "Hey." Charles nodded. Stiff. "Hello." An awkward pause stretched between them. The young man glanced back toward the room, then stood, polite. "You visiting someone?" he asked. Just leaving, actually. Follow-up tests. The young man nodded. Hope everything's okay. It's fine. Charles shifted his weight. You? My mom. The young man's smile was tired but genuine. Heart attack. She's stable now though. Thank God. That's good. Another pause. Charles didn't know why he was still standing there. Didn't know what he was supposed to say. The memory of that night, the cold, the dead phone, his own stubborn pride, sat uncomfortably in his chest. Well? The young man said, gesturing vaguely. I should get back. Good luck with everything. You too. Charles turned to leave, heading toward the elevator. He walked briskly, wanting to put distance between himself and the uncomfortable reminder of his own helplessness that night. But as he passed the nurses' station, he heard voices, 2 nurses talking in low tones, not quite whispers. That boy's been here 3 nights straight, the older one said. Won't leave her side. His mother, Ruth Turner. Heart attack. Poor thing can barely afford the medications, let alone what's coming. Surgery. Bypass, they're saying over 50,000. A heavy sigh. He's been sitting there with the estimate, trying to figure out how. Works at some gas station for minimum wage. It's heartbreaking. Lord have mercy. Charles stood frozen by the elevator, finger hovering over the call button. $50,000. Minimum wage, 3 nights in a chair. He glanced back down the hall. The young man had returned to his seat, head bowed again, holding his mother's hand through the doorway. Charles pressed the elevator button. Stepped inside when the doors opened. But instead of going down to the lobby, he pressed the button for his floor. Back in his room, Charles sat on the edge of the bed. The discharge papers were in his hand, but he wasn't reading them. His jaw was tight. His mind racing. He didn't owe that kid anything. The kid had stopped on his own, had offered help that Charles never asked for, never wanted. But the fact remained, Charles had been sitting in his car, phone dead, too proud to admit he needed help, and that young man had stopped anyway. Had worked in the freezing cold with numb fingers to get Charles's engine running, and Charles had driven away without even a thank you. He hated owing people, hated the feeling of being indebted to anyone, especially some gas station worker who'd probably tell the story to his friends, saved some rich guy stuck on the bridge, wouldn't even take the money. The thought gnawed at him. Charles Whitaker didn't owe anyone anything. That's how he'd built his empire. No debts, no obligations, everything clean, transactional, settled. This wasn't settled. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, found the number for Margaret Sullivan, director of the Whitaker Foundation, the charitable fund he'd established years ago for tax purposes and rarely thought about. She answered on the second ring. Mr. Whitaker, how can I help you? I need to make a donation, Charles said. His voice was clipped, businesslike. St. Joseph Hospital, Cardiac Surgery Fund. Of course. How much were you thinking? $60,000. A pause. That's very generous. I want it designated for a specific patient, Ruth Turner. She's on the 2nd floor. I'll make the arrangements. Should I process this under your name for the— No, Charles cut her off. Anonymous, completely anonymous, no recognition, no plaques, nothing. Understood. I'll have the funds transferred by morning. Tonight, Charles said. Transfer them tonight. Another pause. Yes sir, I'll handle it personally. Charles ended the call. Set the phone down. There. Done. The debt was paid. He'd helped the kid's mother the same way the kid had helped him. Actually, he'd done more. $60,000 was worth a hell of a lot more than 5 minutes with jumper cables. They were even now. No debt, no obligation, nothing owed. Charles stood, gathered his things, walked to the elevator with the satisfaction of a man who'd closed a deal. As he passed the 2nd floor on his way down, he didn't stop, didn't look, just kept going, out to the parking lot, into his car. He drove home through the late afternoon light, the city giving way to the suburbs, then to the gated community where his house sat alone on 2 acres of manicured lawn. The transaction was complete. So why did his chest still feel tight? Why did the emptiness feel just as vast as before? Charles pulled into his driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there in the silence. He paid his debt. They were even, that should have been enough. He went inside, poured himself a scotch, and tried not to think about the young man 3 floors down, sitting in that chair, holding his mother's hand. Tried not to think about what it meant that writing a check felt nothing like standing in the snow, offering help with cold hands and no expectation of thanks. But the thought stayed with him, persistent and uncomfortable, long into the night. Eli was half asleep in the chair when the nurse found him Saturday morning. "Mr. Turner." He jerked awake, heart pounding. She's fine," the nurse said quickly, smiling. "But you need to come to the billing office. They said it's important." Eli's stomach dropped. Important never meant good news. It meant more forms, more numbers he couldn't pay, more apologizing to people in clean shirts and name tags who looked at him with pity they tried to hide. He followed the nurse down the hall, his mind racing. They were going to tell him they couldn't wait anymore, that they needed the deposit now, that without it his mother would be discharged, sent home to wait for another heart attack that this time she wouldn't survive. The billing administrator was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Mr. Turner," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. I know I don't have the deposit yet." Eli said, the words tumbling out. "But I'm working on it. I've got some money saved, and I can get a second job, maybe sell my car." "Mr. Turner." Her voice was gentle. "That's not why you're here." Eli stopped, looked at her. She turned her computer screen toward him. "Your mother's surgery has been fully funded." The words didn't register at first. Eli stared at the screen, at the numbers, trying to make sense of them. Previous balance, $53,247. Payment received, $60,000. Current balance, $0. "I don't understand," Eli said slowly. "We received a donation last night, through the Whitaker Foundation. It covers everything: the surgery, the hospital stay, all follow-up care. There's even enough left over for her medications." Eli's hands started shaking. "Who?" "Anonymous." The woman's smile widened. "The donor specifically requested no recognition, but they designated the full amount for Ruth Turner's cardiac care." Eli couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The numbers on the screen blurred. "This is real." His voice cracked. "It's real." He sat there staring, while the truth of it slowly sank in. His mother was going to live. She was going to have the surgery. She was going to be okay, and he hadn't had to sell everything, hadn't had to beg, hadn't had to choose between her life and their home. Someone, a stranger, a guardian angel, a miracle, had simply given. "Thank you," Eli whispered. Then louder. "Thank you." The woman reached across the desk, squeezed his hand. "Your mother is scheduled for surgery Tuesday morning. Patel is one of the best cardiac surgeons in the state. She's in good hands." Eli nodded. Couldn't speak anymore. Just nodded. He walked back to his mother's room in a daze. She was awake, sitting up, looking better than she had in days. "Baby," she said when she saw his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, Mama." He knelt beside her bed, took her hands in his. "Someone paid for your surgery. All of it. You're going to be okay." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "What?" "I don't know who. They didn't leave a name, but they paid for everything." "Lord have mercy," Ruth whispered. She pulled him close, held him while they both cried. "God is good, Eli. God is so good." Eli held his mother and thought about guardian angels, about miracles that came in the middle of the night, about whoever had seen their struggle and decided to help. He'd never know who they were, but he'd spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of it. Ruth's surgery was a success. Dr. Patel came out after 6 hours with tired eyes and a reassuring smile, telling Eli that his mother's heart was strong, that the bypass had gone perfectly, that with proper care and medication, she could live another 20 years. Eli cried right there in the waiting room. Didn't care who saw. 2 weeks later, Ruth came home, slower, quieter, but alive. The apartment had never felt warmer, even with the heat still working only 3 days out of 7. Eli took another week off to care for her, helping her to the bathroom, making her meals, counting out her pills each morning and night. The medications came in white bottles with labels he could barely pronounce, but they were paid for. All of them, part of the anonymous donation. Every night, Ruth prayed for their guardian angel. Eli prayed too, though he didn't know to whom. But reality returned with the bills that kept coming. The rent, the utilities, the grocery money that never quite stretched far enough. And on the 15th day after Ruth came home, Eli's manager at Murphy's called. "I'm sorry, kid," Tom said, his voice rough with cigarettes and genuine regret. "I held the position as long as I could. But 3 weeks with no show, corporate made me fill it." Eli stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, watching his mother doze on the couch. "I understand," he said quietly. "You're a good worker, Eli. Best I ever had. If something opens up." "Thanks, Tom." He hung up, stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing. Then he opened the newspaper and started circling job listings. For 2 weeks, Eli walked the streets of Burlington, gas stations, grocery stores, warehouses, restaurants, anywhere with a help wanted sign. Most places took one look at him. His worn jacket, his tired eyes, the gap in his resume, and said they'd call. They never did. The ones that did call wanted references he didn't have. Experience he couldn't prove. Availability he couldn't promise because he still needed to check on his mother between shifts. The coffee can under the sink got lighter, then empty. Eli started skipping meals. Told his mother he'd eaten at a friend's house, at an interview, anywhere but the truth. Ruth knew. Mothers always knew. But she was too weak to argue, and too grateful to be alive to complain about anything. On a cold afternoon in early March, Eli saw the posting on the community board outside the library. Woodtaker, logistics. Now hiring, warehouse positions available, starting $12/hour benefits, after 90 days apply in person, 847, Industrial Drive. Eli copied down the address. Didn't recognize the company name. Didn't care. $12 an hour was more than Murphy's. And benefits meant maybe, eventually, real insurance for his mother. He went home, ironed his one good shirt, and rehearsed his interview answers in the mirror until they sounded confident instead of desperate. The next morning, he drove to 847 Industrial Drive. Whitaker Logistics sat at the edge of town, a sprawling complex of warehouses and loading docks surrounded by chain-link fence. The building was gray concrete and steel, utilitarian and cold. Eli parked his Honda in the visitor lot and walked to the front office. The woman at the desk barely looked up. "Help you? I'm here about the warehouse position." She handed him a clipboard. "Fill this out. Someone'll be with you." Eli sat in a plastic chair and filled out the application. Name, address, work history, references. He put down Tom from Murphy's and his pastor, hoping that would be enough. 20 minutes later, a man in a Whitaker polo shirt called his name. "Eli Turner." "Yes, sir." The man looked him over, quick assessing, the way you'd evaluate a used car. "I'm Dave Mitchell, warehouse supervisor. Come on back." The interview lasted 10 minutes. Dave asked about his experience, his availability, whether he could lift 50 pounds repeatedly. Eli answered honestly. Yes, he was available. Yes, he was strong. Yes, he needed the work. Dave nodded. "You start Monday. 6 a.m. Don't be late." "Thank you," Eli said. The relief so overwhelming he nearly repeated it. "Thank you, sir." "Clock in at the loading dock. Ask for Jimmy, he'll show you the ropes." Eli shook his hand, walked back to his car, and sat there for a full minute before starting the engine. He had a job. They were going to be okay. Monday morning, Eli arrived at 5:45 a.m. The warehouse was already humming with activity, forklifts beeping, conveyors rattling, men shouting over the noise. Jimmy was a thick-necked man in his 40s with a clipboard and a permanent scowl. "You the new guy?" "Yes, sir." "Eli Turner." Jimmy looked him up and down, lingered a moment too long. "Follow me." The warehouse was massive, rows of metal shelving stretching 30 feet high stacked with boxes and pallets. The air smelled like cardboard and diesel fuel. "You'll be on receiving," Jimmy said. "Trucks come in, you unload, you sort, you stack. Simple enough even for—" He paused. "Even for someone new." Eli heard what he didn't say. "Got it," Eli replied evenly. The work was hard, repetitive, endless. Trucks arrived every hour and each one needed to be unloaded, every box sorted by SKU number, every pallet stacked precisely or Jimmy would make him do it again. The other workers were a mix. Some nodded at him. Some didn't. A few stared a little too long, whispered a little too quietly when he walked past. By lunch, Eli's back ached. By the end of the first day his hands were blistered. But he'd made it through. He clocked out at 3 p.m., drove home and collapsed on the couch beside his mother. "How was it, baby?" Ruth asked. "Good, Mama. Real good." She smiled and patted his hand. Eli closed his eyes and told himself it was true. The whispers started on the third day. Eli was stacking boxes in aisle 12 when he heard them. Two men, voices low but not low enough. "You see the new guy?" "Yeah. Diversity hire, probably. Figures, companies gotta meet quotas. Bet he doesn't last a month." Eli kept stacking, kept his face neutral, kept working. He'd heard it before. In school, at Murphy's, on the street, the assumptions that followed him like shadows. By the end of the week it got worse. Someone accidentally knocked his lunch off the break room table. Someone else kept moving his time card so he had to search for it every morning. Small things. Petty things. Things that added up. One afternoon, a guy named Travis, tall blonde with a Confederate flag on his thermos, walked past and muttered just loud enough, "Charity case." Eli didn't respond, just kept working, but his jaw was tight for the rest of the shift. 3 weeks in, Eli was loading a pallet when Jimmy appeared. "Turner." "Yes, sir. You're stacking wrong. That's not protocol." Eli looked at the pallet. It was stacked exactly how Jimmy had shown him. "I followed. Don't talk back. Do it again." Eli's hands clenched, then relaxed. "Yes, sir." He unloaded the pallet, restacked it exactly the same way. Jimmy watched, said nothing, and walked away. Travis smirked from across the aisle. Eli kept working. That night, lying on the couch while his mother slept, Eli stared at the ceiling. He thought about quitting, about walking away from the whispers and the smirks and the petty cruelty. But then he thought about the bills, the rent, his mother's medications. The coffee can was empty. This job was all they had. So he'd stay. He'd do the work. Keep his head down. Prove them wrong with every pallet he stacked, every truck he unloaded, every shift he showed up on time. His father had taught him that. When they doubt you, don't argue. Just work harder. Eli closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd go back, and the day after that, and the day after that. He'd survive this. The same way he'd survived everything else. One day at a time. Charles Whitaker rarely visited the warehouse. He had managers for that. Supervisors, people who handled the day-to-day operations while he focused on strategy, acquisitions, the big picture. But once a quarter he did a walkthrough, reminded everyone who signed their paychecks, made sure standards were being maintained. On a Thursday in late March he arrived unannounced. Dave Mitchell scrambled to meet him at the entrance, clipboard in hand, nervous smile plastered on. "Mr. Whitaker, we weren't expecting." "That's the point, Dave." Charles walked through the warehouse observing. The operation ran smoothly, efficiently, exactly as it should. Then he saw him. In aisle 9, stacking boxes onto a pallet, moving with steady practiced efficiency, dark skin, worn work gloves, a focus that blocked out everything else. Charles stopped. It was the young man from the bridge, from the hospital. Eli. He was working here, in Charles' warehouse. Charles stood there, watching. Eli didn't notice, too focused on his work, making sure every box was aligned perfectly, every stack secure. "Who's that?" Charles asked quietly. Dave glanced over. "Turner, new hire. Started about 3 weeks ago. He doing good work." Dave hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. "He's fine. Does what he's told." Charles heard what wasn't being said, but he didn't press. He watched a moment longer, then turned and continued his walk through. But for the rest of the tour his mind was elsewhere. The young man had helped him on the bridge. Charles had paid for his mother's surgery, anonymously, to settle the debt. And now the kid was working in his warehouse, breaking his back for $12 an hour, surrounded by men who probably didn't see what Charles had seen that night in the snow. Someone who stopped when he didn't have to. Someone who helped without asking for anything in return. Charles finished the tour, thanked Dave, and returned to his car. He sat there for a moment, staring at the warehouse. He'd paid the debt. They were even. So why did it still feel unfinished? He started the car and drove away, the question following him all the way home. Spring came slowly to Vermont, the snow melting in patches, revealing brown grass and mud beneath. The warehouse stayed cold, the industrial heaters barely making a dent in the cavernous space. Eli had been at Whitaker Logistics for 6 weeks. His hands had calloused over. His back had stopped aching. He'd learned to ignore the whispers, the looks, the small indignities that followed him through each shift. He showed up early, stayed late when asked, never complained. Slowly, grudgingly, some of the other workers began to nod at him. Not friendship, but not hostility either. It was enough. On a Tuesday afternoon in mid-April, Charles was in the second-floor conference room with potential partners from Boston, 3 men in expensive suits, discussing a merger that would expand Whitaker Logistics into New England. The room overlooked the main warehouse floor. Through the large windows, Charles could see the operation below, forklifts moving, workers loading, the machinery of his empire turning smoothly. He was in the middle of his pitch when the alarm went off. Loud, piercing. The kind that made everyone stop talking and look around. Probably just a drill, one of the Boston men said. But then Charles smelled it. Smoke. He stood, walked to the window. Below, workers were starting to run. A gray haze was gathering near the back corner of the warehouse, thickening rapidly. "That's not a drill," Charles said. "We need to leave, now." The conference room erupted into controlled chaos. The Boston partners grabbed their briefcases. Charles's assistant was already on her phone, calling 911. They moved toward the stairs, the only exit from the second floor. But the stairwell was already crowded. Workers from the offices flooding down, voices echoing, the smell of smoke growing stronger. Charles found himself in the middle of the crowd. Someone jostled him. Someone else grabbed his elbow. "Mr. Whitaker, stay close." It was Dave Mitchell, suddenly appearing at his side, one hand on Charles's arm, like he was escorting the president. Behind Dave, 2 other managers materialized, Jenkins from shipping and Torres from inventory, flanking Charles on both sides. "We'll get you out safely, sir," Jenkins said loudly. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Charles recognized it for what it was. Opportunity. A chance to be seen helping the boss. To be remembered when promotions came around. He let them guide him down the stairs, through the warehouse floor where smoke was now rolling in thick waves from the back section, toward the main exit where daylight and fresh air beckoned. The loading dock was chaos. Workers streaming out, some coughing, some helping others, everyone moving away from the building as fast as they could. Charles stepped outside, his 3 managers still hovering close, already congratulating themselves. "Got you out safe, sir." "No problem, Mr. Whitaker." Charles barely heard them. He was scanning the crowd, counting heads, making sure his people were safe. That's when he saw movement against the flow. Someone running back toward the warehouse, into the smoke. Charles's chest went tight. He knew who it was before he even saw the face clearly. Eli had been in the back section when the fire started, had smelled the smoke, heard the alarm, started running toward the exit with everyone else. But halfway down the main aisle, he'd heard it. A voice, thin, frightened, coming from the wrong direction. "Help. Is anybody there? Help." Eli stopped, turned. Everyone else was running past him, faces tight with fear, focused only on getting out. The smoke was thicker now, blacker. The sprinklers were on but doing nothing. Somewhere behind him, glass shattered, a window giving way to the heat. "Help." The voice was weaker now. Eli looked at the exit, at safety, at the daylight 50 feet away. Then he turned and ran back into the smoke. He found her in the sorting area, Miss Dolores, the elderly black cleaning woman who came in early mornings and stayed late afternoons. She'd been emptying trash cans when the fire started, and now she was trapped behind a stack of fallen pallets, her leg twisted beneath her, unable to stand. "Help, please." She broke into coughing, the smoke stealing her words. Eli dropped to his knees beside her. I got you, Miss Dolores. I got you. My leg. I can't. Don't worry about that. Just hold on to me. He grabbed the pallets, heaved them aside. They were heavier than they looked. Waterlogged from the sprinklers, the wood swollen. But fear gave him strength he didn't know he had. Behind them, something exploded. The electrical panel, probably. The heat intensified. Eli got his shoulder under Miss Dolores's arm, wrapped his other arm around her waist. This is gonna hurt, he said. I know, baby. I know. He lifted. Miss Dolores cried out, but she held on. Eli staggered under her weight. She was heavier than she looked, and his lungs were already screaming, but he didn't stop. The main aisle was impassable now, flames climbing the shelving units, boxes igniting like kindling. The heat was unbearable. Eli took the side route, longer, narrower, but clearer. His vision was blurring. His legs were shaking. Each breath felt like inhaling fire. But he kept moving. Miss Dolores was barely conscious now, her weight getting heavier with each step. Almost there, Eli gasped. Almost there, Miss Dolores. Stay with me. He couldn't see anymore. Just stumbled forward, following the memory of where the exit should be, trusting his feet to find the way. Then, daylight, fresh air, voices, hands grabbed them, pulled them out into the parking lot. Eli collapsed on the asphalt, his lungs convulsing, Miss Dolores beside him. Paramedics rushed over. Someone put an oxygen mask over his face. Someone else was cutting away Miss Dolores's pant leg to check her injury. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Eli heard her voice. He saved me. That boy saved my life. Charles stood frozen watching. He'd seen the whole thing. Seen Eli emerge from the smoke carrying Miss Dolores. Seen him collapse. Seen the paramedics swarm. Around him workers were talking. Did you see that? He went back in. For Dolores, the cleaning lady, could have died. Travis, the one with the Confederate flag thermos, muttered to his buddy, trying to be a hero. Probably just wants attention. Charles's head snapped toward him. What did you say? Travis went pale. Nothing, sir. That man just saved someone's life, while you stood here running your mouth. Charles' voice was cold, sharp. If you have a problem with that, you can clean out your locker right now. Travis looked at the ground. No sir, sorry sir. Charles turned away, disgusted. He looked back at Eli, at the paramedics treating his burns, at Miss Dolores crying and thanking him over and over, at the way Eli just nodded quietly, not making a show of it, not seeking praise. Behind them, the warehouse continued to burn, flames pouring through the roof, firefighters battling to contain it, thousands of square feet, millions in inventory, all going up in smoke, and all Charles could think about was the young man on the stretcher, the one who'd stopped for him on the bridge when no one else would, who'd worked without complaint despite being treated poorly, who'd just run into a burning building while everyone else, including Charles' own managers, had been focused on saving themselves, or worse, on using the crisis to curry favor. Dave Mitchell was still standing nearby, looking pleased with himself. Got you out safe, Mr. Whitaker. Charles looked at him, really looked at him. You got me out, Charles said quietly, and left her to burn. Dave's face went white. Sir, I didn't know. You didn't look. Charles turned away. We'll talk later. He walked toward the ambulance where Eli was being treated. Eli saw him coming. Recognition flickered in his exhausted eyes. Mr. Whitaker. Charles stopped a few feet away. Didn't know what to say. What could you say to someone who'd just done what this kid had done? Is she going to be okay? Charles asked, nodding toward Miss Dolores. Broken leg, smoke inhalation, but yeah. Eli's voice was hoarse, raw. She'll be okay, because of you. Eli shook his head slightly. She couldn't walk. Somebody had to. He broke into coughing. The paramedic put the oxygen mask back over his face. Sir, he needs to go to the hospital. Possible smoke inhalation, second-degree burns. Then take him, Charles said. Whatever he needs, whatever it costs, the company covers it. Eli pulled the mask down. I have insurance. Not for another 2 months. You don't. Charles had read the policy, knew the rules. This is a workplace injury. company responsibility. He met Eli's eyes, saw the exhaustion there, the pain, but also something else. The same thing he'd seen on the bridge that night, in the snow. Quiet decency, the kind that couldn't be taught, or bought, or faked. "Thank you," Charles said. The words felt inadequate, insufficient, for what you did. Eli just nodded. The paramedics loaded him into the ambulance. Miss Dolores was already inside, still crying, still thanking him. Charles stood there in the parking lot, watching the ambulance drive away, sirens wailing. Behind him, his warehouse burned. His managers clustered nearby, waiting for instructions, some of them already spinning stories about how they'd helped evacuate people, how they'd kept everything organized. But Charles wasn't listening. He was thinking about the young man who'd run toward danger while everyone else ran away, who'd risked everything for someone most people didn't even notice, someone the world had taught him didn't matter. But Eli had gone back anyway. Charles looked at the burning building, at the smoke rising into the spring sky. He'd built this warehouse, this company, this empire. He'd built it by being smart, strategic, by knowing when to cut losses and when to invest, by seeing people as assets and liabilities, as resources to be managed. And in 30 years of building, he'd never once run into a fire to save someone, had never even thought to. The fire crew was getting it under control. The damage would be extensive, but it could be rebuilt. What couldn't be rebuilt was whatever Eli had that Charles didn't, that willingness to run toward someone else's pain, instead of away from it. Charles sat in his car for a long time before driving home, and for the first time in 30 years he wondered if he'd been building the wrong things. The warehouse stayed closed for 2 weeks while investigators determined the cause and contractors assessed the damage. Electrical failure, they said. Old wiring that should have been replaced years ago. Charles authorized the repairs immediately, signed off on a complete rewiring of the entire facility, told his managers that if they ever cut corners on safety again, they'd be looking for new jobs. Eli was released from the hospital after 2 days, second-degree burns on his hands and forearms, smoke damage to his lungs. The doctors told him to rest, avoid exertion, use the breathing treatments twice a day. He was told he'd be paid for the time off, full wages, plus a bonus for the injury. It felt like more than he deserved. Miss Dolores called him every day, sent cards, tried to give him money he wouldn't accept. "You saved my life, Eli. I just helped, Miss Dolores, that's all." But the memory haunted him. Not the fire itself that was already fading into a blur of smoke and heat and fear. What haunted him was what he'd seen while helping her out. The way everyone had run, the way they'd trampled each other to get to the exits, the way some of the managers had surrounded Miss Whitaker like he was the only person in the building worth saving. And Miss Dolores, forgotten in the back corner, calling for help that wasn't coming. Eli sat at the kitchen table during those 2 weeks, bandages on his hands, staring at nothing. Ruth watched him carefully. "You did a good thing, baby. I just helped someone. That's everything." But Eli wasn't sure anymore. Maybe helping wasn't enough. Maybe the world was full of people running toward exits, and the few who turned around were just fools. Charles couldn't stop thinking about it. The fire, the smoke, the way his managers had grabbed him, ushered him out, made a show of protecting the boss while an elderly cleaning woman lay trapped in the back, and Eli, running against the crowd. It haunted him in a way he couldn't explain. He tried to work, tried to focus on the rebuilding, the insurance claims, the business that always needed his attention, but his mind kept drifting back, to the bridge, to the hospital, to the fire, to the young man who kept helping people, even when it hurt him. One evening 10 days after the fire, Charles found himself driving. He didn't plan it, didn't consciously decide. His car just ended up on the east side of town. The address was in the employee files. Something Charles told himself he shouldn't look at, but did anyway. The building was old, 4 stories, brick, the kind that had probably been nice once. Now the paint was peeling, one of the ground floor windows was covered with cardboard, and the concrete steps were cracked and uneven. Charles parked across the street, turned off the engine. 3rd floor, 4th window from the left. He sat there in the dark, watching. The light was on. Through the thin curtains, he could see movement, shadows. He didn't know why he was here, what he was looking for. Then the curtain shifted. Eli was sitting at a small table near the window. His hands were still bandaged. His mother sat across from him. They were eating dinner, something simple, sandwiches maybe, soup in mismatched bowls. Ruth said something. Eli smiled. Small, tired, but genuine. She reached across the table and patted his bandaged hand gently. He nodded, said something back. The meal looked humble. The apartment looked cold. But there was something in the way they sat together. Charles felt his chest tighten. His own house had 8 rooms, a dining table that seated 12, a kitchen with appliances he'd never learned to use because he had people for that. When was the last time he'd sat at a table with someone? Not a business dinner, not a charity gala, just dinner, with conversation that mattered, with hands reaching across the table. He couldn't remember. His son called once a month, dutiful, distant. They talked about work, weather, nothing that went beneath the surface. His daughter texted on holidays, brief messages with emojis, keeping him at arm's length the way he kept her there first. His ex-wife had remarried, was happy from what he heard, had found someone who came home for dinner. And here was Eli, living in an apartment that was falling apart, working for $12 an hour, hands wrapped in gauze from burns he'd gotten, saving someone no one else cared about. And he was sitting at a table with his mother, eating dinner, finding something to smile about. He had what Charles didn't, what Charles had forgotten how to have. Charles watched the light in that window for a long time, watched Eli help his mother clear the table, both of them moving slowly, him with his bandaged hands, her with her weakened heart. Watched them sit together on what must have been a couch, Ruth's head leaning against her son's shoulder. Watched the kind of evening Charles couldn't remember ever having. But he sat in his car across from a falling apart apartment building, watching a kid who had nothing, and feeling poor for the first time in 30 years. Eventually the light went out. The window went dark. Charles started his car and drove home through empty streets. His house was exactly as he'd left it. Spotless, silent, expensive. He poured himself a scotch he didn't drink, sat in his study staring at a wall that had cost more than Eli's entire apartment building. The emptiness was still there, had always been there, but now he could see its shape clearly. It looked like a dinner table with no one sitting at it, like a house with 8 rooms and no laughter in any of them, like a life spent building walls so high he'd forgotten what they were keeping out, or keeping in. The warehouse reopened 3 weeks after the fire. New wiring, new sprinkler systems, new safety protocols that Dave Mitchell announced with the enthusiasm of a man trying to save his job. Eli returned to work on a Monday morning, his hands still tender beneath the bandages, but functional. The doctors had cleared him, said he was lucky, that another minute in that smoke and he wouldn't have made it out. He didn't feel lucky, just tired. The other workers treated him differently now, some with respect, nodding when he passed, making room for him at the break table. Others with resentment, muttering that he'd made them all look bad, that he was showing off, trying to get ahead. Eli ignored both, just did his work, stacked his pallets, kept his head down. On a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after returning to work, Eli took his lunch break to run an errand. The Whitaker Foundation had sent a letter to his apartment, a courtesy notice about the donation, a routine follow-up about Ruth's recovery. Ruth had asked him to go to the foundation office to leave a thank you card. Someone was kind to us, baby. We should say thank you properly. So Eli walked the 8 blocks to the foundation's office, a modest building near downtown. Nothing fancy, just functional. The receptionist took the card with a warm smile. Mrs. Turner is doing well. Yes, ma'am. Much better. We're so glad. Would you like to sign our visitor book? Many of our beneficiaries do. Eli nodded, reached for the pen. That's when he saw it. The plaque on the wall behind the reception desk, bronze, polished. Whitaker Foundation, founded 1998. Charles E. Whitaker, founder and principal donor. Below it, photos. Charles Whitaker at various charity events.
Charles Whitaker shaking hands with politicians. Charles Whitaker presenting oversized checks. Eli's hand froze over the visitor book. Whitaker, Charles Whitaker, his boss, the man from the bridge, the man at the hospital, the anonymous donor. His chest tightened. The pen slipped from his fingers. Sir, are you all right? Eli looked up at the receptionist. The founder, Charles Whitaker. Is he the one who approved my mother's surgery funding? The woman hesitated. I'm not supposed to discuss specific, please. Something in his voice made her soften. She glanced at her computer screen, typed quickly. The donation was listed as anonymous, but she bit her lip. It came directly from Mr. Whitaker's personal authorization. He handles very few cases personally. Eli felt the world tilt. Thank you, he managed. Thank you for telling me. He left the card on the desk and walked out into the spring sunlight, his mind racing. Eli didn't go back to the warehouse. He sat in his car in the parking lot, staring at nothing, while everything clicked into place. The bridge, the hospital visit, the anonymous donation that had appeared the next day. Charles Whitaker had paid for his mother's surgery, not because he was generous, not because he cared about them, but because Eli had helped him first, because he felt obligated, because he wanted to clear the debt. Eli's hands clenched on the steering wheel. He thought about his mother crying with joy when she heard the surgery was paid for, thought about how grateful they'd been to their guardian angel. But it hadn't been an angel. It had been a transaction, payment for services rendered. Eli sat there for a long time, his throat tight, his chest aching with something he couldn't name. Then he started the car and drove back to the warehouse. He needed to know why. I need to speak with Mr. Whitaker, Eli told Dave Mitchell. Dave looked up from his clipboard annoyed. He's busy. Make an appointment, now, please. Something in Eli's face made Dave hesitate. What's this about? It's personal. Dave sighed, picked up the phone, spoke quietly, then hung up looking surprised. He'll see you. 5 minutes. Don't waste his time. Charles' office was everything. Eli's apartment wasn't. Spacious, clean, expensive furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the warehouse and beyond. Charles was standing by the window when Eli entered, turned when the door closed. Eli, his voice was neutral, carefully controlled. What can I do for you? Eli stood just inside the doorway, work gloves still in his hand. I went to the Whitaker Foundation today, he said quietly, to drop off a thank you card from my mother. Charles's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I saw your name on the wall, Eli continued, your foundation, and I asked the receptionist about my mother's surgery funding. Silence stretched between them. Why? Eli asked. His voice wasn't angry, just tired, confused. Why did you pay for it? Charles turned back to the window. Does it matter? Your mother got the surgery. She's alive. It matters to me. Why? Charles' voice had an edge now. Would you rather she died? Would you rather I hadn't helped? I want to know why you did it. Eli took a step forward. Was it because I helped you that night? On the bridge, Charles' jaw tightened. He didn't answer. That's it, isn't it? Eli's voice was quiet. You felt like you owed me something. So you paid the debt, anonymously, so we'd be even. I saved your mother's life, Charles said flatly.
You paid a bill, Eli's voice cracked. That's different. Charles turned his eyes sharp. How is it different? She's alive. The result is the same, because Eli stopped, swallowed, because if it was just to clear a debt, then I don't want it. Charles stared at him. What? If you only did it because you felt obligated, then it's not a gift, it's a payment. Eli's voice was steady now, quiet but firm. And I don't want to be paid for helping someone. That's not why I stopped that night. That's ridiculous, Charles said. Your mother needed the surgery. I paid for it. It's done. Then I'll pay you back. Charles's eyes widened. You'll what? I'll pay you back. Every dollar. It might take me years, but I'll do it. Don't be absurd. You work for minimum wage. $12 an hour, Eli corrected quietly. You live in a falling apart apartment. You and your mother eat. Charles stopped himself, but too late. Eli's eyes narrowed. How do you know what we eat? Charles looked away. You've been watching us, Eli said slowly, the realization hitting him. You came to our apartment. Charles didn't deny it. Why? Eli asked. If you just wanted to clear a debt, why did you come watch us? I don't know, Charles said, his voice tight. Yes you do. I don't. Charles's voice rose. He turned to face Eli fully, and for the first time, emotion cracked through his careful control. I wrote the check to settle the debt. Yes, to not owe you anything. But then I couldn't stop thinking about it. About you sitting in that hospital for 3 days. About you running into a fire. About, he stopped, took a breath. About how you do things without expecting anything back. Charles continued, quieter now. How you help people, and then refuse money and act like it's nothing, like it doesn't matter, like you don't need to be even. I don't need to be even, Eli said quietly. Why not? Charles's voice was almost pleading now. Why don't you care about debts? About what people owe you? About keeping everything clear and settled? Because that's not how it works, Eli said gently. Helping someone isn't a transaction. You don't do it so they'll owe you, or so you can owe them less. You just do it. But why? Charles looked lost. Why would you live like that? Always giving, never keeping score, never protecting yourself. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then my mother used to tell me something her mother told her. We help because we can, not because we should. It's not about obligation. It's not about fairness. It's just being human. Charles sank into his chair. I don't know how to do that. Yes you do, Eli said. You just forgot. No. Charles shook his head. I never knew. I've spent 30 years building a company, making money, winning deals. Everything was transactional. Everything had a price. And I thought that was how the world worked. He looked up at Eli, and his eyes were haunted. I have everything, Charles said, his voice breaking. I have money most people can't imagine. I have power, influence, respect. But I watched you and your mother eat dinner in that tiny apartment, and you were laughing, you were happy, and I realized. His voice cracked. I realized I'm the poorest man I know. Eli's throat tightened. My son calls me once a month out of duty, Charles continued. My daughter sends texts on holidays. My ex-wife remarried someone who makes her laugh the way I never did. I live in a house with 8 rooms, and I'm alone in every one of them. Tears were streaming down his face now. I wrote you that check because I thought money could fix things, because that's all I know how to do. But you're right, it was a transaction, a way to not owe you, to not feel whatever it was I felt watching you stop in the snow for someone who didn't deserve it. Everyone deserves help, Eli said quietly. Do they? Charles looked at him. Do I? After everything I've done, after 30 years of treating people like assets and problems, and line items. Eli crossed the room, sat in the chair across from Charles's desk. My father died when I was 14, he said quietly. Charles looked up. We had a fight the night before, Eli continued. I don't even remember what it was about, something stupid. He was sick in pain, not himself, and I was 14 and angry. I said things I didn't mean, terrible things. His voice cracked. He died the next morning, heart attack, and I never got to say I was sorry, never got to tell him I loved him, never got to take back those words. Tears rolled down Eli's cheeks. I've carried that for 14 years, he said. The weight of words I can't unsay, of time I can't get back, of a chance I missed because I thought I'd have more time. He met Charles's eyes. But you still have time, Eli said. Your son, your daughter, they're still alive. You can still call them, still tell them you're sorry, still try to fix what's broken. They won't want to hear from me, Charles whispered. You don't know that. You're just scared. Charles laughed bitterly. Of course I'm scared. What if they say no? What if they tell me it's too late? What if they say yes? Eli interrupted gently. What if they've been waiting for you to call? What if they want their father back just as much as you want them? Charles covered his face with his hands. I don't know how to do this, he said, his voice muffled. I don't know how to just talk to people about real things, without it being a negotiation or a transaction. You're doing it right now, Eli said. Charles looked up, surprised. You're talking to me, Eli continued. Really talking, not about work or debts or what anyone owes. Just talking, being honest, being human. Charles stared at him. Why are you helping me? After everything I did wrong, the anonymous donation, treating it like a debt, watching you without telling you, because you need help, Eli said simply, and because I think underneath all those walls, you're a good person who just forgot how to be one. Charles' throat worked. I don't deserve your help. It's not about deserving, Eli said gently. It never was. They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally Charles took a shaking breath. What do I do? How do I even start? Call your son, Eli said. Today, right now, and just say I'm sorry. I want to talk, really talk. If you're willing, that's it. That's everything. Charles looked at his phone, at the contact labeled Michael, that he hadn't called in 4 months. His hand shook as he reached for it. I'm terrified, he admitted. I know, Eli said. But do it anyway. Charles picked up the phone, stared at it for a long moment, then he dialed. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Dad. Michael's voice was cautious, surprised. Charles' throat closed. He couldn't speak. Dad, you there? I'm here, Charles managed. I need to talk to you, really talk, not about business or holidays or nothing, about, his voice broke, about how I failed you, how I'm sorry, how I want to try to fix it if you'll let me. Silence on the other end. Charles squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the rejection he was sure was coming. Then yeah, Michael's voice was thick with emotion. Yeah, Dad, I'd like that. Charles felt something crack open in his chest, something frozen that had been there so long he'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. After he hung up he sat there staring at the phone, tears streaming down his face. Eli stood quietly. I'll let you. Wait. Charles looked up. Thank you. For this. For telling me. For he gestured helplessly. For stopping that night on the bridge. For everything. Eli smiled. You're welcome, Mr. Whitaker. Charles, he said. Please, just Charles. You're welcome, Charles. Eli turned to leave. Eli. He stopped. I'm sorry, Charles said, for making your mother's surgery about debt instead of about caring, for treating help like a transaction, for all of it. I know, Eli said gently, and I forgive you. He left the office, closing the door quietly behind him. Charles sat alone for a long time, staring at his phone, thinking about his son's voice, thinking about second chances, about bridges that could still be rebuilt, about walls that could come down if you were brave enough to let them. He picked up the phone again, dialed his daughter's number, and started building his way back home. It took 4 weeks to arrange. 4 weeks of phone calls, awkward at first, both sides not knowing what to say, how much to reveal, whether trust could be rebuilt with words over distance. But Charles kept calling. Every other day, then every day. Short conversations at first, 10 minutes 15, about weather and work and nothing that mattered. Then gradually, about things that did matter, about how Michael had wanted his father at his college graduation, but pretended he didn't, when Charles said he couldn't make it because of a meeting in Singapore, about how Sarah used to paint pictures for him when she was little, hoping he'd hang them in his office, but he never did because they weren't professional, about how Patricia had begged him to come to marriage counseling, but he'd said he was too busy, until one day she stopped begging, and just left. Charles listened, really listened, didn't interrupt with excuses or justifications, just let them talk and tell him how much he'd hurt them. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. And on a phone call with Michael in the 3rd week after Michael had finished telling him about missing his father at his college graduation, Charles said the words he should have said 15 years ago. I'm sorry, you deserved better, you deserved a father who showed up, and I failed you. Michael was quiet for so long Charles thought the call had dropped. Then thank you, for saying that, for meaning it. I do mean it, Charles said, his voice shaking, and I want to do better. If you'll give me the chance. I'd like that, Dad. That same week Charles called Patricia. I know you've moved on, he said. I know you're happy with David and I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, but I want to try to fix things with the kids, and I need your help. What do you need? Patricia asked cautiously. I want to have dinner, all of us together. You and David too if you're willing.
Just dinner, where we can talk, really talk. Patricia was silent for a long moment. They've been waiting for this, Charles, she said finally. For years they've been waiting for you to try. I know, I'm sorry it took me so long, so am I, but I'm glad you're trying now. Will you come? Yes, Patricia said, we'll come. They arranged to meet on a Saturday evening in late May, at a small restaurant Eli had recommended, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and checked tablecloths and food made by people who cared. Charles arrived first, too nervous to be late. He sat at the table, a round one, he'd specifically requested, so no one would be at the head, and waited. Michael arrived next, 32 now, tall like Charles, but with softer eyes. He hugged his father briefly, awkwardly. Thanks for doing this, Dad. Thank you for coming. Sarah came a few minutes later, wearing a paint-stained dress and silver jewelry she'd made herself. She hugged Charles longer than Michael had, and he felt her shoulders shake slightly. I missed you, she whispered. I missed you too, sweetheart. Patricia arrived with David, a quiet, kind-looking man with graying hair and gentle eyes. Charles shook his hand, surprised to find he felt no jealousy, only gratitude that someone had been there for his family when he wasn't. They sat down. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Charles didn't know how to start. Then the door opened, and Eli walked in, with Ruth moving slowly but steadily, holding her son's arm. I hope you don't mind, Charles said to his family. I invited some friends. They're part of why we're all here. Michael looked confused, Sarah curious. Patricia smiled slightly, recognizing something in Charles' nervousness. Eli and Ruth joined them. The table expanded to fit 7. Everyone, Charles said. This is Eli Turner, and his mother Ruth. They're the reason I finally understood what I'd been doing wrong all these years. How's that? Michael asked, not unkindly. Charles looked at Eli, at Ruth, at these two people who had so little but had shown him what truly mattered. Because they taught me that family isn't something you build around business meetings and quarterly earnings, Charles said quietly. That love isn't transactional, that being present matters more than being successful. He looked at his children. I spent 30 years building a fortune, he continued, but I forgot to build a home. I was at every board meeting and missed every recital. I closed every deal and missed every birthday. I thought I was providing for you by being successful, but what I was really doing was abandoning you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I can't get those years back, Charles said, his voice breaking. I can't redo your childhoods or show up to things I missed, but I want to try to be your father now, really be your father, if you'll let me. Michael stared at his plate. Sarah wiped her eyes. Patricia squeezed David's hand. The silence felt massive. Then Michael spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I used to make up excuses for you. When Dad didn't come to my games, I'd tell the other kids you were traveling for something important. When you missed my graduation, I told myself it was fine, that you were busy, but it wasn't fine. He looked up, his eyes wet. I needed you, Dad, and you weren't there. I know, Charles whispered. I'm sorry. Are you really? Michael's voice shook. Or is this just another thing you're doing because you think you should? Another box to check. No. Charles leaned forward. Michael, I'm here because I'm lonely, because I have everything and nothing, because I realized too late that money can't buy back time, or love, or the sound of your children's voices when they're glad to hear from you instead of just polite. He looked at Sarah. When you were 8, you painted me a picture of our family. You gave it to me, and asked if I'd hang it in my office. Do you remember? Sarah nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I told you my office was for professional things, Charles said, and I saw your face fall. I saw how much I'd hurt you, and I did it anyway because I thought, his voice broke, I thought being successful was more important than being your father. I still have that painting, Sarah whispered. I want to see it, Charles said. I want to hang it on my wall. I want to see all of your paintings. I want to know about your gallery and your art, and your life. I want to know you, Sarah, not as a quarterly update but as my daughter. Sarah stood up, walked around the table, and hugged him. She cried into his shoulder the way she used to when she was small, and had scraped her knee or had a nightmare. Charles held her and felt 30 years of walls crumble. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I know, Daddy. I know." When Sarah sat back down, Ruth spoke for the first time. "Family isn't something you have," she said gently, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who'd loved deeply and lost much. "It's something you do, every day, in small ways, and it's never too late to start doing it right." Patricia wiped her eyes. "She's right, Charles. It's never too late. Tell us about them," David said kindly, nodding at Eli and Ruth. "Tell us how you met." So Charles did. He told them about the bridge, about being stranded in the snow, too proud to admit he needed help, his phone dead, sitting in his car slowly freezing. He told them about Eli stopping, about how he'd refused the money afterward, and how Charles had driven away without even saying thank you. He told them about the hospital, about seeing Eli sit with his mother for days, holding her hand, never leaving, about hearing she needed surgery they couldn't afford. "And I wrote a check," Charles said, anonymously, "because I thought it was about paying a debt, about not owing anyone anything." He looked at Eli. "But Eli taught me it wasn't about debt, it was about caring, about helping someone because they need help, not because they've earned it, or because you owe them." He told them about the fire, about watching Eli run back into the smoke while everyone else ran out, about Miss Dolores who everyone had forgotten except Eli. "He keeps helping people," Charles said, "even when it costs him, even when no one's watching, because that's who he is." He looked at his children, and watching him, I realized I'd never done that. I'd never helped anyone without expecting something back. I'd never been there for someone without it being transactional, including you. "But you're trying now," Michael said quietly. "I'm trying now," Charles agreed. "I'm terrified I'm too late, but I'm trying." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of years that needed healing, of hurt that needed acknowledgement, of hope that needed room to grow. "I missed you, Dad," Michael said finally. "I missed having a father who knew me, who cared about my life." "Tell me," Charles said. "Tell me about your life, your work, your girlfriend you mentioned on the phone. Tell me everything." So Michael did, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, about his job at the architectural firm, about Melissa who he'd been dating for 2 years, about the house they were looking at buying. Sarah talked about her art, her gallery, her dream of teaching kids from low-income families how to paint. Patricia talked about her life in Europe, about David's children from his first marriage who she'd grown to love. And gradually, as dinner was served and wine was poured and Ruth asked questions that made everyone feel heard, the walls came down. Charles listened, really listened, asked questions, laughed at stories, cried at the painful parts. When dessert came, Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him pictures of her paintings. Charles looked at each one carefully, asking about her process, her inspiration, telling her they were beautiful. "You really think so?" Sarah asked, sounding like the 8-year-old girl who'd offered him that first painting. "I think you're incredibly talented," Charles said, "and I'm sorry I didn't tell you that when you needed to hear it." As the evening wound down, as coffee was poured and the check was quietly paid, Charles looked around the table, at Michael talking with Eli about architecture, at Sarah showing Ruth photos of her gallery opening, at Patricia and David, holding hands and smiling, at faces that had been strangers to him even though they shared his blood. "I built a fortune," Charles said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. "But I forgot to build a home. I was so focused on success that I missed what actually mattered, and by the time I noticed, I thought it was too late." He looked at Eli and Ruth. "But they taught me it's never too late, that you can always start choosing differently. That family isn't something you have, it's something you do." He looked at his children. "I know one dinner doesn't fix everything. I know I have to earn back your trust, that I have to show up, not just today but every day. But I want to. I want to know you. I want to be part of your lives, really part of them." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. Michael did the same from the other side. "We want that too, Dad," Sarah said. "It'll take time," Michael added, "but we can try." "That's all I'm asking," Charles whispered. "A chance to try." Outside the restaurant, as they said goodbye with promises to call, to visit, to try again, Eli and Ruth prepared to leave. "Thank you," Charles said to them, "for coming, for making this possible, for," he gestured helplessly, "for saving me." "You saved yourself," Eli said. "You made the call, you showed up, you did the hard part. I wouldn't have without you." Ruth patted his hand. "You're a good man, Charles. You just forgot for a while, but you remembered. That's what matters." Charles watched them walk away, Eli and Ruth, arm in arm, heading toward Eli's car in the parking lot. Then he turned back to his family. Michael and Sarah were standing with Patricia and David, talking quietly. Sarah looked up and saw him watching, smiled. It wasn't perfect. There were years of hurt to heal, trust to rebuild, relationships to repair. But it was a start, and for the first time in 30 years, Charles felt something other than empty. He felt hope. 1 year later, Eli was promoted to warehouse supervisor. 3 years after that, he became operations manager, overseeing 3 facilities across Vermont. He moved his mother into a better apartment, one where the heat worked every day, and the windows weren't patched with cardboard. He bought a newer car, put money in savings, but he never forgot where he came from. Still stopped to help strangers, still treated everyone with respect, still showed up for people when they needed him. When Ruth Turner passed away 18 years after her surgery, peacefully, surrounded by love, the funeral was standing room only. Charles attended, sat beside Eli, wept for the woman who'd taught him what truly mattered. "She lived a good life," Eli said afterward, "a long life, because of you, because of a check I wrote." Charles replied. "No," Eli said gently, "because you learned what it meant to care, to help, to be present." Charles Whitaker retired at 65. He spent time with Michael in Boston, meeting Melissa, attending their wedding, holding their daughter, his first grandchild, and crying with joy. He visited Sarah in California, went to her gallery openings, bought her paintings and hung them in every room of his house. He had dinner with Patricia and David once a month. They became, improbably, friends. He downsized from his 8-bedroom house to a small cottage near the lake, learned to cook, joined a book club, volunteered at the food bank where Ruth had worked. On his 68th birthday, all his children came to visit, with partners, with grandchildren, with laughter that filled his small house to bursting. "This is better than the big house," Sarah said. "Much better," Charles agreed, "because this one's a home." 5 years after Ruth's death, Charles and Eli established the Ruth Turner Scholarship through the Whitaker Foundation. Full ride for low-income students. 50 students a year, no requirements except need and character. At the first award ceremony, Eli gave the speech. "My mother taught me that we help because we can, not because we should," he said. "That kindness doesn't keep score. That the best thing we can give someone is our presence, our time, our willingness to stop when someone needs help." He looked at Charles sitting in the front row beside Michael and Sarah and their families, and she taught someone else that too, someone who'd forgotten but remembered, who spent the rest of his life making sure other people don't have to choose between their dreams and their survival. The audience applauded. Charles wiped his eyes. After the ceremony, his grandson, Michael's son, 7 years old, tugged on his sleeve. "Grandpa, why are you crying?" "Because I'm happy," Charles said, lifting him up. "Because I almost missed all of this but I didn't. Because someone stopped in the snow one night and changed everything." On a cold evening in December, 20 years after that night on Willow Street Bridge, Eli was driving home from work. Snow was falling, heavy, quiet, blanketing the roads in white. He crossed the Willow Street Bridge, rebuilt now, stronger, safer. Just past the bridge, he saw it. A car on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. A young woman standing beside it, phone in hand, looking frustrated and cold. Eli didn't hesitate. He pulled over, got out, walked toward her through the snow. Need some help? The woman looked up, cautious at first, then relieved. My battery's dead, and I can't get cell service out here. I've got jumper cables, Eli said. He worked quietly, efficiently, the way his father had taught him, the way he'd done 100 times. When her engine started, the woman tried to give him money. Eli smiled, shook his head. Keep it. Just help someone else when you get the chance. Thank you, she said, her eyes bright with tears. Really, thank you. You're welcome. Eli got back in his car and drove home through the falling snow. His apartment was warm. His mother's photo sat on the mantel, Ruth smiling, forever 59 in his memory. And somewhere across town, Charles Whitaker was reading bedtime stories to his grandchildren, his son and daughter, and their spouses gathered in his living room, his small house full of the laughter he'd almost missed forever. The bridge on Willow Street stood dark and patient in the snow, waiting for the next person who would stop, waiting for the next chance to change everything. The snow fell soft and silent, covering Eli's tire tracks, but the kindness remained, always, because some debts aren't meant to be repaid, they're meant to be passed on.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.